I started working at Stratosyn Labs on a warm spring morning in Austin. I had just left a big company where everything moved at a glacial pace, and Stratosyn felt like a dream: young, fast, full of promise. During my interview, the founder told me, "Here, everyone has a chance to make their mark." I believed him, the way young people believe that if they just work hard enough, every door will open. In my first year, I worked nonstop. I rewrote almost their entire data system, fixed hundreds of tiny bugs no one even noticed, and when our first major project launched flawlessly, the executives acted like it was the natural order of things. My name wasn't mentioned in the announcement email, no bonus, no credit. But they said, "Mara, we couldn't have done it without you." I smiled, said thank you, and went back to my desk. Stratosyn was the kind of company that looked perfect from the outside. Morning meetings came with organic coffee and granola bars, every wall plastered with slogans like "Think bold, fail fast, make impact." But behind those words was exhaustion, quiet rivalry, and an unspoken rule: whoever talks louder wins. I wasn't loud. I believed in data, not slogans. My desk sat in the far corner, where afternoon light always slanted across the keyboard. 3 monitors, 2 unwashed coffee mugs, and a tiny cactus. A gift from my first teammate who quit after burning out. I named it Pixel. Every time I saw that cactus fighting to stay alive in the dry, air-conditioned office, I saw a reflection of myself. I built the core analytics platform that landed the company a multi-million-dollar deal with a national logistics chain. I wrote that system from scratch, alone, in 2 months, while the other tech teams were still arguing over variable names. The day Stratosyn announced the contract win, the CEO sent a thank you email listing every contributor's name except mine. My manager told me, "You're the one who keeps everything running. Everyone knows that." But who was everyone? No one said a word when the press came to interview the team. I once asked for a promotion after 3 years. The meeting lasted 10 minutes. They said, "You have great potential, but we need to see leadership. Let's revisit this next quarter." I heard the phrase "next quarter" so many times that it became part of my pulse. By year 5, I understood that next quarter really meant never. I wasn't the type to chat in the break room, join weekend parties, or play company sports. I was only good at one thing: keeping the system flawless. When it broke at 3 in the morning, they called me. When it ran perfectly, they forgot I existed. I became the shadow behind other people's success. And the scariest part was how normal that started to feel. There were nights I sat alone in the office, the light casting pale reflections on white walls. I'd play old jazz records, my fingers moving across the keyboard until dawn. In those hours, I thought about my mother. She'd been a mechanical engineer at a car factory in Oklahoma. When I was 17, a male coworker took credit for her engine redesign. She knew it, but said nothing. When I asked why, she gave me a tired smile. "Because you can't win a game built on someone else's rules." I cried that night, not out of pity, but anger. Anger at a silence I couldn't understand. Maybe that's why I've always wanted to prove the opposite. I thought if I worked harder than anyone, the system would have to notice. But after 5 years, I learned something else. The system wasn't built to be fair. It was built to protect whoever holds the power. The culture at Stratosyn was a theater of people pretending to be brilliant. Words like synergy and scalable floated through every meeting. The louder talkers always got more credit than the ones who actually solved problems. I watched, I listened, and I stopped being angry. I just felt cold. Still, I worked. I coded, optimized, logged every change, kept copies of everything on a personal drive, partly out of habit, partly out of instinct. I didn't trust promises anymore. By the 5th summer, Stratosyn started expanding. They talked about IPOs and global vision and hired new people with bright eyes and wide smiles. I'd once looked like them. Maybe we all had, before learning that in this world, people only listen to those who shout loud enough to be heard. One Friday afternoon, while debugging a minor module, I overheard the chief technology officer talking to HR in the hallway. "We need someone with a stronger presence, someone who can represent the product team, someone who excites people." HR replied, "I think I know just the person. I didn't think much of it then. I logged another bug and kept working. But a few weeks later, an email appeared in the company inbox. Welcome our new product director, Ethan Cade. I stared at the glowing screen as the office dimmed around me. 5 years, thousands of sleepless hours, millions of lines of code, and now a new chapter was opening. I didn't know whether to feel hopeful or uneasy. I only knew one thing for sure. The rules of the game were about to change. News about Ethan Cade spread faster than a software update. The next morning, by the time I walked into the office, everyone was already buzzing. Someone said he used to work in New York. Another added that his previous company had just raised tens of millions of dollars. A third voice chimed in. He's only 30 and already mentioned by Forbes. I said nothing. I just poured my coffee and went back to my seat, pretending not to hear the name that now hovered in every inbox. The introduction meeting was held in the largest conference room on the 8th floor. Warm light glowed across the wooden table, the smell of coffee mingled with expensive perfume, turning the air thick. Ethan walked in to the sound of applause. He was tall, blonde, with the easy smile of someone who knows the world always welcomes him. His suit fit perfectly, his voice carried the rhythm of a performer. He began with a line that drew every head toward him. I'm not here to manage. I'm here to build something that will make the world remember Stratacyn. The room erupted again, and I knew he had already won them over. I watched from the back row. I wasn't impressed by the speech, only by how deliberately he looked at people, each glance chosen, each smile perfectly timed. He was the kind of man who understood that power didn't come from skill, but from making others believe you had it. In his first week, Ethan walked around the teams, saying he wanted to understand the company's culture. He stopped by my desk, leaned casually on my chair, and smiled. Mara, right? I heard you're the one who kept our systems alive during the crisis. I nodded, about to respond, when he added, That's amazing. I want to learn from you. People like you are the reason this company still stands. It was the first time in years someone spoke about my work with respect. Yet there was something in his eyes that unsettled me, a look that was part admiration, part calculation. In the weeks that followed, Ethan hosted a string of strategy sessions. He spoke in buzzwords: data synergy, artificial intelligence empowerment, predictive intelligence. People nodded, taking notes, though few truly understood what he was saying. I just watched in silence. He had a talent for making uncertainty sound visionary, a skill I never had. Cheryl, the head of HR, quickly became his closest ally. They had lunch together, appeared side by side in every meeting, laughing at stories the rest of us didn't get. In internal memos, Cheryl often referred to Ethan's vision as if he were some kind of savior sent from above. One Thursday afternoon, Ethan invited me to a private discussion in a small meeting room. He said he wanted to understand the analytics system better. I brought my laptop, opened the architecture map, and explained every module, every optimization algorithm I had spent years refining. He listened carefully, took notes, and occasionally said, That's impressive. When I finished, he smiled politely. Could you give me access to the main repository? I'd like to review it in detail before the improvement plan. I hesitated. The main repository contained the system's entire core, including the automation scripts I had built. Proprietary work never shared beyond the core team. I told him I'd need to ask the CTO first. He smiled again. No need, I'll speak to him myself. Just send it over for convenience. His tone was gentle, but carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed. I left the room uneasy. Part of me wanted to believe he was just doing his job. Another part knew better. That night, I wrote in my work journal, 23rd. Ethan requested repository access. Purpose unclear. Be cautious. After that, Ethan began to interfere more directly. He proposed changing the testing process, shifting code approval from me to his new product team. The CTO agreed without discussion. I received only a short message from Cheryl. This is a necessary step for efficiency. Everything changed quickly. My name disappeared from project documents. In weekly meetings, Ethan presented his improvement plans, essentially copies of my earlier proposals. Whenever I spoke, he interrupted with a friendly smile. Great point. Let's see if that fits into my team's roadmap. I realized I was being pushed out of what I had built. One afternoon, while I was reorganizing the project folders, Grace, my closest colleague, stopped by. She lowered her voice. I heard Ethan's preparing a report for the board. They're introducing him as the head of AI analytics. Your product mock-ups are in his slides. I said nothing, my pulse quickening. Grace looked worried. Maybe you should talk to HR. I smiled faintly. I've learned HR never stands on the engineer's side. A few days later, Ethan sent out an all-team email. Subject: Temporary restructuring for performance alignment. In it, he announced the merger of all tech groups into a single product unit under his direct management. My name appeared at the bottom of the list, labeled Special Technical Support. The title lead engineer was gone. That night, I stayed late, staring out at the city lights through the glass wall. I remembered my mother's words. You can't win if they make the rules. Maybe she was right. But I also knew I wasn't that quiet girl anymore. I started saving everything: emails, commit logs, discussion files, screenshots. I didn't yet know what I would do, only that instinct told me to prepare. The next morning, Ethan passed by my desk, stopped, and said softly, "We're going to build something amazing, Mara. Thank you for trusting me." He spoke like a man confident that I had no other choice. I looked at him, nodded once, and turned back to my screen. Inside, I could feel a storm gathering, and this time I had no intention of running. Monday morning, I turned on my computer earlier than usual. My routine was to check the system logs before the rest of the team woke up. But that day, an error appeared on the screen. I tried 3 times, and the same message kept flashing back at me. Permission denied. I thought it was a technical glitch, but when I checked the admin board, I saw it clearly. My commit access had been revoked. I could no longer update, edit, or download a single line of code from the main project. A cold wave ran down my spine. For the first time in 5 years, I was locked out of the thing I had built. I messaged the tech channel, asking if anyone else was having access issues. No one replied. An hour later, Ethan sent an email to the entire team. Temporary access restrictions to ensure security during the transition. Thank you for your cooperation. One short sentence, no name mentioned. But I knew exactly who it was meant for. I stood up, walked to the small kitchen, and poured coffee to steady myself. Cheryl from HR walked by, offering her polite smile. I asked casually, "Do you know why my access was restricted?" She feigned surprise. "Oh, it's probably temporary. Ethan's restructuring the teams." Then she refilled her cup and walked away. Her answer was too clean, too perfect, like it had been rehearsed. Back at my desk, I opened my backup repository stored on a personal drive. What I saw made my chest tighten. The main project folder had been renamed Cadeflow. The first line in the README file reads, Author, E. Cade. Every module, every automation script, every analysis algorithm I had written over sleepless nights was there, except my comments were edited out and my name was gone. I scrolled down to the bottom of the file. In a few places, Ethan had left my original notes but rearranged the sentences. In some, he forgot to delete my name in the comments, only to add at the end, to be optimized by EK. He hadn't just stolen my work, he was turning me into a footnote in his story. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window. Sunlight hit the glass, sharp and blinding. I didn't know whether to laugh or rage. Everything I had built now bore someone else's name. Part of me wanted to walk away. But another part, the one that had watched my mother's silence years ago, whispered, "Don't." That night, I stayed late. The office was empty, the only light coming from the server rack's faint blue glow. I logged into the old backup system that no one paid attention to anymore. There, I found the earliest versions of the project, every line of code signed with my digital signature. I saved them all to a separate drive, encrypting it with a password. It felt like unearthing the bones of a creature I had once brought to life. Around 8, my phone buzzed. It was Grace. "You're still there?" she asked. I said yes. She paused, then spoke quietly. "I heard Ethan's planning to present Cadeflow to the board next week. They're treating it as the company's flagship project." I asked, "Who told you?" She said, "Someone in marketing." He said, "Every slide has Ethan's name on it, and the visuals are your old interface." I stayed silent. On the other end, Grace sighed. "Mara, maybe you should talk to HR." I laughed dryly. HR? Cheryl's been having lunch with Ethan every day. You think they'd listen to me? Grace didn't answer, just said, "Be careful," and hung up. I turned off the lights and left the office. Austin glowed bright against the night sky. I walked across the bridge, the river wind cool against my skin, but my thoughts were tangled. I thought of every line of code I had written, every idea dismissed before someone else repackaged it as brilliance. Ethan wasn't stupid. He knew how to exploit the blind spots, both in the system and in people. He didn't steal to be famous. He did it to prove power, and power, in this world, mattered more than truth. When I got home, I opened my laptop again and checked each file one more time. I found an old recording of a team meeting from 2 months earlier where Ethan had praised my model. In it, he said, "It's incredible that Mara's team built something capable of restructuring our entire platform." That short sentence was now my first piece of evidence. I saved it and renamed the file proof_01. I sat for a while, then opened my worn leather notebook. I wrote, April 7th. Ethan renamed the system to CadeFlow. HR pretends not to know. Grace warned me. My access has been revoked. I've backed up everything. When I closed the notebook, my hands no longer shook. I wasn't scared anymore, only calm, like someone who finally understood she was being erased from her own life, and that if she didn't act, she would disappear completely. I didn't sleep that night. I brewed coffee, played an old jazz record, and started combing through every document, every email, every design file. I copied everything to an encrypted drive, then added one final line to my journal. If they want to erase me from history, I'll rewrite history myself. The next morning, when I arrived at the office, every monitor in the tech department had a new wallpaper. A glowing logo, bold letters beneath it, CadeFlow, powering the future. I stared at it for a long time. Someone's voice came softly from behind me. "Looks nice, doesn't it?" I turned around. It was Ethan. He smiled, eyes gleaming. "We're entering a new era, Mara. Thanks for the solid foundation." I smiled back, my tone steady and cold. "Don't mention it. Just remember who laid the first stone." He nodded, not realizing it wasn't a compliment. When he walked away, I looked back at the screen. The words "powering the future" flickered in the glow, and in that moment I understood I had become a ghost inside my own creation. But ghosts don't die. They wait for the right moment to return. The morning the CadeFlow logo appeared on every screen in the office, I knew exactly what was happening. No one said a word, but I understood. I had been erased from Stratasyn's history. People started calling it Ethan's platform, Ethan's new vision. No one mentioned the person who built it. I still sat at the same desk, but every day felt like walking into a house that no longer belonged to me. The air around me shifted. When I entered a meeting room, conversation stopped. On Slack, I was removed from two main project channels, the same ones I had created. When I asked, the team lead said, "Ethan wants to streamline the process." I knew what that really meant. You're no longer trusted. Ethan was everywhere. He held constant meetings, sent motivational emails each morning, and spoke about his new leadership mindset. In team presentations, he introduced CadeFlow version 2.0 with bright slides full of lines of code I recognized as my own. His LinkedIn post about it spread across the company, featuring the interface I had designed. The comments overflowed with praise. No one mentioned me. Cheryl from HR was now practically his shadow. They appeared together at every internal event. One morning, she stopped by my desk, smiling sweetly. "Ethan really values you, Mara. He said you're a positive influence on the team." I replied calmly, "Maybe my influence is just keeping the system running." She laughed, but her eyes didn't. 2 days later, I received an email. Short meeting with HR, 10 in the morning. Inside were Cheryl and Ethan, sitting side by side. Cheryl opened her laptop, voice even. "Mara, we've noticed some recent calendar entries that need clarification." She turned the screen toward me. It showed my private notes. Consult IP scope, private review, system integrity notes. I said nothing. We just want to make sure there's no conflict of interest, she continued. Ethan leaned back, a faint smile playing on his lips. I asked, "Who gave HR access to my personal calendar?" Cheryl answered smoothly. "We're just reviewing internal activity to ensure compliance." I knew then. They weren't reviewing anything. They were building a narrative. The meeting lasted 15 minutes. As I walked out, Ethan spoke behind me. "We all want transparency, right?" His tone sounded polite, but the message was clear, a warning. That afternoon, I had lunch with Grace, the only person still talking to me. She glanced around, then whispered, "HR's investigating you. Cheryl told someone she suspects you've shared internal data." I gave a dry laugh. I barely have time to talk to people inside. Grace looked uneasy. "Ethan's close with the board. I think they'll believe him." I stayed quiet. She took my hand. "If I were you, I'd leave before they make it impossible." I shook my head. Not this time. That evening, I stayed after hours. The office was silent, the servers glowing faint blue. I checked the system logs and found unauthorized access to my personal account, an internal IP anonymized. I took screenshots, saved the logs, and copied everything to an external drive. Every move I made was careful, deliberate, like crossing a minefield. By 9, I left the building. Austin's skyline blazed bright, but a chill emptiness settled inside me. I thought of my mother, the woman who lost everything because she stayed silent. I promised myself I wouldn't. The next morning, I sent an email requesting a personal day off. Then I drove to the office of David, a patent attorney I had met months ago at a tech conference. His office was small, walls lined with framed patents. I told him everything: Ethan, CadeFlow, HR, the revoked access. When I handed him my backup drive, he plugged it in, scrolled through the files, and nodded. "Every timestamp matches. You built the system's core. If there's no explicit IP transfer clause in your contract, you hold the legal rights." I asked, "How do I protect it?" David replied, "We'll file a provisional patent covering 3 main components: the optimization system, the automation algorithm, and the interface framework. Each can stand as its own claim." I nodded, feeling the faint rush of finding a way out. But I also knew, if they discovered this, they'd come after me hard. That night, I went home and opened my laptop. I saved all original files, labeled the folder Origin. Then I opened my journal and wrote, "May 15th, HR has started. Ethan's behind it. Met with the lawyer. They don't know the real game is just beginning." I closed the notebook and caught my reflection on the dark screen. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was preparing. If they were setting a trap for me, I would turn that trap into evidence that destroyed them. And this time, I wouldn't lose. I returned to Stratison on Monday morning after my day off. No one greeted me. People avoided my eyes, pretending to be busy with their screens. There was something different in the air, as if the rumor had already spread and I was the story everyone had heard. By mid-morning, an email from HR appeared in my inbox. "Mara, please attend an urgent meeting at the HR conference room, 11 in the morning." I read it 3 times. No explanation, no name attached, just the general HR address. I knew what this was, the next step in their plan. The HR room sat at the end of the hallway, beige walls, a pale wooden table, and a dying plant in the corner. When I walked in, Cheryl was already seated with Ethan. A thick folder rested on the table. Cheryl offered a polite smile. Ethan gave a brief nod. "Thank you for coming, Mara," Cheryl began. "We just need to clarify a few matters before we continue our collaboration." I sat down. She opened the folder and pulled out several printed pages. "Recently, we discovered some calendar entries indicating external appointments, specifically ones labeled Consult IP Scope and Private Review." She glanced at me over her glasses, tone casual as if discussing the weather. "Can you explain these?" I kept my voice steady. "Those are personal notes. I haven't done any outside work or shared company information with anyone." Ethan leaned forward slightly, his tone light but sharp. We have to protect Stratison's intellectual property. When a senior engineer schedules private appointments involving IP, we have to ask questions. But I never shared any data, I said, locking eyes with him. If you have evidence, show it. Cheryl hesitated for a moment. At this stage, we're only verifying. However, given the severity of the issue, we'll need to suspend your access until the review is complete. I let out a quiet laugh. Investigation? You revoked my access 2 weeks ago. Ethan tilted his head, his smile unshaken. Then you admit you were aware your access had been removed. I realized this wasn't a meeting, it was a script. I stood, gathering what calm I had left. If you want to fire me, just say it. I have nothing to hide. Cheryl flinched. Mara, no one's saying anything about termination. I cut her off. We both know this is the final step. Then I turned to Ethan, speaking slowly. You can erase my name from the project, but you can't erase the truth. The room went silent. Ethan only smiled, his eyes cold as glass. Truth is a flexible concept, Mara, and here I define it. I left the room without another word. That afternoon, a second email arrived. Subject: Termination of employment. Violation of confidentiality policy. It was short, effective immediately. HR will arrange for you to collect your belongings. No meeting, no chance to explain. Just one closing line. We wish you success in your future endeavors. When I reached my desk, a security guard was already there with a cardboard box. People glanced over, then quickly looked away. I packed fast, my coffee mug, the little cactus named Pixel, and a few scattered notes. Across the room, Grace watched me with sad eyes, but didn't dare move closer. Ethan appeared just as I was about to leave. He stood with his arms crossed, voice gentle, almost cordial. Nothing personal, Mara. Just a matter of principle. I looked at him. Principle? I smiled faintly. You call stealing someone's work a principle? He didn't answer, only smiled wider, a trace of amusement in his eyes. Careful, Mara. Emotion makes people careless. I nodded. Thanks for the advice. I'll remember it. As the elevator doors closed, I saw him still standing there, hands in his pockets, calm as ever. I felt something unexpected, a strange sense of relief, like shackles falling away. They thought they had ended me. They didn't know they had just freed me. At home, I set the box down and sat in silence. Sunset light spilled through the window, casting Pixel's shadow across the wall. Half the stem was dry, but a small green sprout had emerged. I touched it gently and smiled. We're not dead yet, are we? I opened my laptop. In my inbox was an email from David. Confirmation. Provisional patent applications for all 3 systems have been filed. Protection effective today. Below were 3 registration numbers. I stared at the screen for a long time, just one sentence, but it made my whole body tremble. I thought of the nameless years, the sleepless nights, the invisible labor. Now all of it had a name, mine. I opened my leather notebook and wrote, May 20th, fired for betrayal. They don't realize they just gave me freedom. That night, I cleared my desk at home, aligning 3 monitors in a row. I opened every original file, every system diagram. Everything was there, intact, time-stamped, proof of ownership. I sent David a compressed copy and wrote one line, "What's next?" His reply came minutes later. Prepare. Outside, light rain began to fall. I took a sip of coffee, watching the city shimmer through the glass. I thought of Ethan, of Cheryl, of the way they smiled as they signed my termination notice. I didn't feel anger, only a deep, steady calm, the kind that comes before a storm. I whispered to myself, tomorrow we start again. But not as an employee, as an owner. 3 days after I was fired, I still woke up at 6 in the morning. No Slack notifications, no emails from management, just the sound of coffee dripping in a quiet kitchen. Everything felt unnaturally still. But within that stillness, I felt something else, power. On my first morning away from Stratosin, I reviewed everything, every system log, every backup file, every note in my worn notebook. Each detail was a piece of the puzzle they tried to hide. Every timestamp existed long before Ethan showed up. Every record proved I was the creator. I made 3 backups and stored them in 3 separate places. By noon, David called. Mara, I've reviewed the documents. The company used your intellectual property without a single transfer agreement. Legally, that's a serious violation. We won't make noise yet. For now, I suggest issuing a temporary notice restricting the use of the modules you own. I nodded, staring out the window. The clouds drifted slowly over Austin, thick and heavy. They won't stay quiet, I said. David chuckled softly. They don't need to stay quiet. They just need to stay afraid. That afternoon, I drafted a detailed summary of the modules, the core analytics engine, the automation framework, and the interface system. I listed all the evidence: original files, meeting transcripts, commit logs, and metadata. When I sent it to David, he replied, "Perfect. Enough to keep them awake at night." That evening, I opened LinkedIn. Ethan had just posted, "Sometimes innovation means removing what holds us back." The photo showed him standing proudly in a boardroom, the CadeFlow logo glowing behind him. I stared at the caption, smiling faintly. If he thought he had removed me, he was about to learn what a real mistake looked like. 3 days later, the first envelopes went out. 3 thick, sealed letters sent to Stratosin's legal office, the board of directors, and the product division. Each contained the provisional patent filings and a formal notice to cease use of my intellectual property until a licensing agreement was reached. David told me, "Everything's been filed properly. From now on, don't contact them directly. Let the law do the talking." The next day, Stratosin went silent. No calls, no emails. But on the third day, the whispers started. A former coworker from marketing messaged me. "What did you do?" "The company is in emergency meetings. They're saying there's a software copyright issue." I simply replied, "Nothing serious? I'm just reclaiming what's mine." I could picture the scene inside that building: Ethan frowning, Cheryl frantically making calls, the board demanding answers. They thought I'd walk away quietly. Instead, I'd force their whole system to stop. And this was only the beginning. That evening, David texted, "They've received it." Stratosin's legal department asked for time to review. I asked, "How long?" He replied, 7 days at most. They're scrambling. I didn't spend those 7 days idly. I reached out to a few former colleagues, people who had also been pushed out for the sake of restructuring. One of them, an engineer named Jordan, still had temporary access to a secondary system. He sent me an internal audit report. Every line of my code was still running on their servers, untouched. I saved it and added it to the evidence file. On the 5th day, a small article appeared on a tech blog, rumors of an IP dispute at Stratosin. No one knew the source, but I had a good idea. David wasn't a man of many words, but he knew exactly where to send them. That afternoon, a strange call came through. A man's voice. "Mara, this is Tom from TechPulse. We've heard about your case with Stratosin. Any comment?" I answered, "Not yet. But when I speak, everyone will hear." When I hung up, I felt calm, strangely calm. I wasn't afraid anymore. This fight wasn't loud, and it didn't need to be. No shouting, no spectacle, just evidence, time, and resolve. They had money and media. I had something they couldn't fabricate: the truth. On the 7th day, David's email arrived. Subject: Response from Stratosin. I opened it. They denied all wrongdoing but admitted that certain portions of the current product might overlap with development materials from a former employee. They proposed a private discussion to reach an amicable resolution. I smiled. Private discussion meant they were starting to panic. David asked, "Do you want to meet with them?" I said, "Yes, but this time I'll be the one sitting on the other side of the table." That night, I added a new entry to my journal. May 27th. The quiet war has begun. They're fighting for their reputation. I'm fighting for my name. I closed the notebook and looked out the window. The rain had stopped. The moonlight reflected off the glass, soft and cold. I knew this was only the first phase. They still believed they could negotiate, bury the truth before it spread. But they didn't understand. I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition. I wanted them to see me, to remember I existed, and to know they couldn't erase that. This fight was no longer between me and Ethan. It was between the creator and the system that tries to consume creation. And this time, I'd make sure they learned the lesson they always forget. Never underestimate the quiet ones. 3 days after Stratison sent its legal response, the tech world began to stir. Small blog posts about an internal intellectual property dispute started popping up across the web. At first, it was just fragments of speculation, but like all good rumors, it spread fast. One morning, when I opened my laptop, TechPulse's article was front and center. Stratosyn accused of stealing code from former employee. Below the headline was Ethan's photo from a conference, his confident smile now looking almost comically fake. The article didn't mention my name, but everyone in the industry knew. David called moments later. Mara, this is when they'll strike back. They won't stay silent. I asked, what do you think they'll do? He replied, media spin, maybe even character attacks. Be ready. He was right. Within 48 hours, Stratosyn released an official press statement denying all allegations and implying that a disgruntled former employee was spreading misinformation for personal gain. No names, but the message was crystal clear. I read it 3 times, then laughed. Personal gain? I whispered. They think I wanted fame? That evening, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from former colleagues, reporters, even strangers. Some offered support, most were skeptical. Mara, are you really suing them? Did you actually write that code? Ethan said he just refined your system. I read every message without replying. I knew it wasn't the time to speak yet. The next morning, David sent me a draft of our public statement, short, firm, and clinical. Our client is the rightful owner of the source code and algorithms used in CadeFlow. We hold verifiable technical evidence and valid provisional patent filings. We advise Stratosyn to cease usage or face legal consequences. I added only one line at the end. We don't need to win in the media. We only need to win in the truth. 3 days later, our response went public. Social media exploded. Under Stratosyn's official post, comments poured in by the hundreds. If they're innocent, why not show the code? I've heard about this. Pretty sure she's the real author. The tide began to turn. Ethan tried to control the damage by appearing on a major tech podcast. His voice was calm, composed. Our company has always valued collective innovation. Every project is a team effort, not the work of one individual. The host asked, can you confirm your current system contains no code from former employees? Ethan paused, then smiled. I think people who leave often have selective memories. I listened to the interview in my apartment, not angry, just quietly amused. He was digging his own grave, one word at a time. I sent the recording to David. Perfect, he said. The man who over-explains is the one who's scared. 3 days later, David forwarded a message from the patent office. All 3 of your filings have been accepted and are moving into final review. My heart raced. I hadn't won yet, but I was closer than ever. That night, I met Jordan at a quiet bar. He brought a small USB drive. I can't hold on to this anymore, he whispered. The system still has the old commit logs. Every one of your commits is stamped with your signature. They didn't erase them in time. I gripped his hand. Thank you. This is the last piece I needed. At home, I plugged it in and opened the files. Hundreds of log entries, each one proof. My name appeared again and again, undeniable. I saved everything in a folder labeled proof, made 2 backups, sent one to David, and stored another offline. The next day, Stratosyn struck back, this time dirtier. An anonymous post spread on tech forums accusing me of stealing ideas and company data before leaving. It was detailed, manipulative, written to sound credible, citing internal sources. I exhaled slowly. They were getting desperate. David called. No emotional responses, Mara. Let them trip over their own lies. I agreed, but inside I knew exactly what to do next. 3 days later, I sent David the new logs and the podcast recording. It took him less than 24 hours to assemble the counterfile. Our second statement went out. Technical evidence confirms that CadeFlow's architecture was developed from the original code authored by Mara Jensen, now protected under a provisional patent. Any contrary claims are false. The story ignited like wildfire. Major outlets began covering it. Whistleblower or visionary? The woman behind CadeFlow. They used the same story Ethan tried to bury to make me the symbol he feared. Ethan vanished from social media for 2 days. When he finally returned, his post was short and strained. I believe in due process and fairness. But everyone knew, when a man has to remind the world of fairness, it means he's already lost control. That evening, David called again. The Stratison board has requested a private meeting with you. Ethan won't be present. I paused for a moment, then said, Good. It's time they learned how to listen. I closed my notebook and wrote the final line of the day. June 4th. The counterattack has begun. They tried to bury me in noise, but I have something louder. Truth, written in time. I looked out the window. The summer wind drifted in, warm and steady. I felt no anger, only calm. The storm was nearing its end, and this time I would be the one to write the final line. The meeting with the board took place on a Thursday morning. I arrived 15 minutes early, carrying a small bag with copies of every document. The conference room sat on the top floor of Stratison Tower, the same floor I used to see only through the elevator glass. Now I was walking in not as an employee, but as the person they had to face. There were 6 board members. 3 of them I had met before, back when they still called me the logistics engineer. Today their eyes were different, cautious, cold, with a trace of unease. At the head of the table sat Chairwoman Whitmore. She was the first to speak. Thank you for coming, Ms. Jensen. We wanted to hear directly from you before making a decision. I set my bag down, opened my laptop, and connected it to the large screen. The files appeared one by one, lines of code, commit logs, timestamps. This is the core of CadeFlow, I said evenly. I wrote it more than 4 years ago. Not a single line here belongs to anyone else. One board member interrupted, but Ethan said he completely restructured the system. I cut in, calm and clear. If he truly did, then show me. Here's the current metadata, still containing my digital signature. I can prove it in 5 minutes. Silence. I continued. You didn't just use my work. You commercialized it under someone else's name. That's not a technical error. That's fraud. Whitmore studied me for a moment. What do you want, Mara? I drew a slow breath. I don't want money, not yet. I want my name restored to where it belongs, and I want Ethan held accountable for what he stole. They exchanged glances. Finally, Whitmore said, We'll need time to review. I nodded once. I gave you 5 years to review. Now it's time to act. I closed my laptop and walked out. As the door shut, I heard whispers, tense, hurried. I knew what was coming. That afternoon, the headline spread, Stratison faces internal audit over intellectual property. Within 2 hours, the board suspended Ethan Cade from his position as product director. Official reason: violation of the company's development and asset management policy. I read it quietly. No joy, no triumph, just relief. Partly because the truth had begun to surface, and partly because I knew this wasn't the end. That night, David called. They're in chaos. One of the major investors demanded a full source code review. You're close to winning. I sat on my balcony, looking out over the lights of Austin. It's not me winning, I said softly. It's justice starting to work. 3 days later, an old colleague emailed me. Ethan's access has been revoked. They're combing through the entire codebase, and nearly 40% still traces back to you. HR has been completely replaced. I smiled, then shut the screen. But Stratison wasn't finished. They held an emergency press conference to contain the fallout. The spokesperson said, We're cooperating fully with legal authorities to ensure all rights are respected. When asked about the provisional patents filed by a former employee, they refused to comment. Hours later, The Verge published a detailed analysis comparing CadeFlow's design to my patent filings. Every element matched. They called me the Forgotten Architect. The article went viral. For the first time, the public knew my name. The next morning, my phone lit up. Interviews, offers, investment proposals. But amid all that noise, only one message mattered. An email from David. They're offering a settlement. 7 figures. full author credit, a 5-year licensing deal for continued use of your system. I read it 3 times. 7 figures, enough to change a life. But the line that broke me wasn't about money. It was the last sentence. CadeFlow software will publicly acknowledge its foundation as developed by Mara Jensen. I sat there for a long time, silent. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Not because they paid for what they'd done, but because the truth was finally written down. In ink, not excuses. That evening, I walked through downtown Austin. The Stratison building still glowed bright, but its light no longer intimidated me. I thought of Ethan, maybe deleting accounts, maybe hiring lawyers. I didn't hate him anymore. He just looked small now. A week later, the agreement was signed. I received the settlement. My name was reinstated in the official documents and technical archives. The press called it one of the most significant personal IP recoveries in modern tech history. I gave no interviews. I didn't need to. Everything I had to say was already written in every line of code I ever wrote. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and created a new folder. I named it Foundry, the word I'd once scribbled in my notebook during a sleepless night. I began building again, a cleaner, more transparent system, one entirely my own. When the first line of code appeared, I whispered, "No one can erase this name again." In my journal, I wrote, June 10th. They fell. But what I reclaimed wasn't just recognition. It was I. And for the first time in years, I slept well. 3 months after signing the settlement with Stratison, I woke up to an early autumn morning. Pale sunlight slipped through the curtains and brushed across the wooden table where my laptop sat, the same one I'd used for 5 long years, the witness to every rise and fall. Coffee steamed beside it, and in that quiet moment, I realized something simple and profound. I no longer belonged to the past. The war was over. I no longer dreamt of boardrooms or heard Ethan's footsteps echoing down the corridor. Everything felt like an old movie I'd watched too many times. And strangely, I didn't feel empty. I felt free, a deep, quiet freedom I had never known before. I still worked, but not from the old apartment. I rented a small space at a WeWork in downtown Austin. It smelled of coffee and new ambition, the kind of place where keyboards never seem to stop. I placed a small sign on my desk with 2 simple words, Foundry. I didn't build Foundry to get revenge on Stratison. I built it because I wanted to rebuild things the right way. Transparent, fair, a place where no one's name would ever be erased from their own creation, where no one had to stay silent just to survive. The first days were lonely. I rewrote every line of code myself, building a foundation that rose from the ashes of the old system, reborn, redefined. I called it Echo, a lightweight, secure automation platform. Every line of code carried a blockchain signature. This time, no one could steal it. One afternoon, while I was documenting features, there was a knock on the door. It was Grace, my old colleague. She stepped in with a hesitant smile. "I heard about Foundry," she said. "You really did it, didn't you?" I handed her a cup of coffee and asked, "You still working there?" Grace shook her head. "No. Layoffs. Cheryl's gone. Ethan. Too." I didn't ask for details. Some stories don't need to be retold. Grace glanced around the small office, her eyes settling on my screen where lines of code were scrolling. "Need someone to help?" she asked. The question caught me off guard for a second. I nodded. Always. But here, whoever builds something gets their name on it. Every document, every file, no exceptions. She smiled. "Then I'm in." And just like that, Foundry had its first teammate. Then another, and another. Engineers who had once been overlooked, replaced, or dismissed by companies that called them non-essential. I called them survivors. We worked without titles, without hierarchy, only trust in the product and in each other. Echo grew faster than I expected. Within a year, a mid-sized logistics firm adopted it for pilot testing. It ran flawlessly. A tech blog wrote, "A new startup led by the engineer once wronged by Stratison is redefining how companies manage data." I read the article silently, didn't share it, didn't comment. I just texted David. "We've started over," he replied. And this time, you're the one writing the rules. Ethan vanished from the industry. I heard he started consulting for startups, but no one really mentioned him anymore. Cheryl moved to Denver and opened a small cafe. The news didn't make me happy, just calm, like the world had quietly fallen back into place. Balance restored without anyone else needing to suffer. Once, a journalist asked me, "Do you forgive them?" I thought for a long time before answering. There's nothing to forgive. I don't carry them with me anymore. I still keep the old cactus, Pixel. It's misshapen now, but alive, stubbornly so. I placed it beside the Foundry logo on my desk. Every morning when I see it, I remember who I used to be, the one left behind, stepped on, but still standing. One October evening, our team gathered by the Colorado River, watching the sunset burn gold across the water. Grace sat next to me. If Stratison called, wanting to partner, would you say yes? She asked. I smiled. Maybe. But not to work for them, to make them work for me. The team laughed. The sound was light, drifting with the breeze. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't living on defense. I was building forward. That night, I came home and opened my journal for what might be the last time. October 18th. Foundry has its first contract. Echo is alive. I'm no longer defined by what they took, but by what I built back. Loyalty isn't foolish, as long as you stay loyal to yourself. 5 years ago, they called me a traitor. Now I'm simply free. I closed the book and set it on the table. Outside, the city lights glowed. The world was still rushing forward, but for me, it was finally quiet. I had walked through the darkest part and proved that truth, when guarded by conviction and knowledge, can never be buried. The pixel tilted slightly in the breeze from the window. I reached out and touched it, like keeping a promise. I don't know where Foundry will go from here. I don't need to. For the first time in years, I'm no longer afraid of being forgotten. Because now, I'm the one writing my story, and no one can erase it again.